I want to talk about some of the takeaways from this earnings season. I think we had actually some pretty big events, and I keep talking about the importance of competitive response. In our view, economics is the science of competitive response, and investing is better using economics as a tool. Or, in other words, if you want to invest money into businesses and generate wealth, you better have an idea of competitive response. And I think this earnings season is a good example. I want to single out three stocks: Netflix, PayPal, and Facebook. And they're all showing certain signs. Obviously, they're all collapsed for large caps pretty unusually. For example, Facebook's down 26% after earnings. It's now down like 35% for the year. Those are massive moves for large caps. And I think there is a dynamic shift going on. The theory of competitive response is kicking in. And I also want to use a line from a poem I recently read. And the poem says something along the lines of good and bad for nature are just different shades of light. And I think the same applies to the markets. Good and bad actions in the markets are just different shades of light. In other words, what is good and what is bad, we don't decide that as humans. We have an opinion, that's what markets do, but markets actually follow a certain Darwinian exclusivity dynamic, or if you want, evolution, or whatever you want to call it. Markets follow their own purpose, and the purpose of the market, very similar to Darwinian evolution, is to keep proliferating certain organisms within biotopes that are more competitive within those types of biotopes. And that's what evolution does. We don't know if there's a more sort of meta purpose here. That's, of course, question for theological types of rounds. Here, we want to focus on competitive response, because competitive response, in the end, is the response to a change in your biotope and in your market. So we use the analogy of evolution. Instead of biotope, we just say market. So a change in your market. And the question is, how do you respond? And there's several questions you can do. And I think I want to use this episode to discuss those three stocks, certain concerns we had for a while that are now manifesting themselves, and also reiterate why we're very comfortable with Tesla. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's February 3rd, 2022. This is Cryptelco. Since the last update, we're down roughly 4%. The market's down roughly 1%. For the year, we're down 19%. The market's down 5.7%. We're underperforming by 13.3%. So three stocks have had massive moves in the last 10 days: Netflix, Facebook, and PayPal. And I think they're very good case studies in terms of what happens when competition kicks in, when companies fail to respond to competition, or companies sometimes follow the wrong clues into how to grow and what to do and those sort of things, and then get stranded in a situation where they're not competitive anymore. Let's start with Netflix. Netflix basically admitted there is competition. There's YouTube, there's Apple, there's all these other companies, Amazon, that are doing movies. I think what's wrong with Netflix, in a nutshell, the way I see it, is that the company has been morphing more and more into a media company. And they've given up on their technological edge. To some extent, maybe that they were forced to. I think the way for Netflix to compete with everybody else has always been to start with technology and then morph technology into media. For example, it started with streaming. That was technology. Getting good quality streaming to you was technology. And then the movies, they were sort of almost secondary, or the shows. They were good shows, but they were kind of secondary in a way that it was more important that you were able to stream, that you were able to watch on demand, and all those sort of things. Then later on, AI became a big deal in terms of recommendation. And, Netflix is doing a decent job, but that's already, I think, where the company is failing. I think they're not doing enough on that front. And even reading Reed Hastings' book, No Rule Rules, it shows you that their focus is on talent density, on things like that. But the case studies that Hastings used in that book are very often almost exclusively, if I remember correctly, it's all about media. It's like people that come from other companies like HBO and all that stuff. And it just shows you that there's sort of an infiltration of media culture into Netflix. And that is dangerous because once you put yourself at the level of your competition, then by definition, you're not that competitive anymore. In other words, what is your daily agenda? If you bring in an executive from HBO, what is her daily agenda going to be? She's going to have the same types of things. She's going to meet producers, talk to actors, send around scripts, finance movies. That's what they've been doing at HBO or at ABC or wherever they come from. And therefore, it is highly unlikely that you will have some sort of differentiation. What I thought Netflix should have done, for example, way back is open up their recommendation engine to not just their library, but everybody's library, and become like a Google for media. Imagine you watch a nice show, let's say, I like certain shows that Netflix has, Skylines, a German show about some rappers in Frankfurt, gangster, German, all that stuff. I like that kind of stuff. So why don't you recommend me? Maybe there is an Argentinian show that you don't have in your library that is very similar, local. I like local slang. I just like that kind of stuff. So wouldn't it be amazing if you could do that and then somehow monetize it? So they've never chosen that path. They've always only focused on their own library. And that's why you get these weird recommendations where, let's say I watched this show, Skylines, and now I'm getting recommendations for every possible European show that Netflix has done. Well, they're not the same thing. I don't care about, let's say, drug trafficking in Galicia or murders in Poland. It's just not my thing. And just because you did it and just because it's in Europe doesn't mean it's going to be interesting to me. So be better at recommending, be better, focus more on AI. Those were the things that I think Netflix should have done. Also, I was always intrigued by, for example, the ability for Netflix maybe to produce more shows at lower cost, a little bit like Tesla is doing. And I'm gonna, hopefully get to the point where I can conclude why I'm so comfortable with Tesla's competitive situation. But one of the reasons is that Tesla is very, very focused on building a machine that builds the machine. They've said that in the last earnings call. They've said that the competitive advantage within the electric car industry is going to be who has the best capacity to produce as many cars as possible. That includes, of course, not just volume, but also flexibility and innovation. And Musk has said that many times, that the rate of innovation is going to be the most important competitive advantage of Tesla. Let's get back to Netflix. I feel like Netflix has kind of dropped the ball on that, and they've started doing shows that are very popular, very similar to the typical media companies. For example, they've done shows that, and I don't want to bring in my personal taste necessarily, but there is something to be said. Shows like Stranger Things, Squid Game, all these shows, in my view, are very shallow shows. They really are kind of going after the lowest common denominator, getting as many eyeballs as possible. That's the old media game. Fine, you can do that. Disney can do that, and many companies can do that. But then you have to maybe adjust to the valuation that Disney has. That's the problem. This is what happened with the market right now. If you start pushing shows like Squid Games instead of shows like the old shows like the House of Cards stuff, the Ozark stuff, Bloodline, all these shows that in my view are shows a la Breaking Bad, cinematographic oeuvres, real art, aggressively trying new things that are still in the realm of let's say an artsy, entertaining Hollywood type show, which is, I think that's where Netflix started making its name. Now you're going into, again, like these types of shows like Squid Game and Stranger Things. They remind me more of the superhero movies that Disney's doing. It's fine, you can do that. You can get 1 billion hours of viewing and stuff like that. It's all good, fine. For example, the show I liked, Skylines, was canceled. Apparently because there were some copyright issues and also because it just wasn't worth their while. I think it's a phenomenal show. It's unbelievably creative because it's kind of a story about gangster rappers, and in every episode there's a song that is evolving in the show, in the actual episode, and then the song is being produced and written. And I just thought it's a beautiful idea, phenomenal acting, some of the best German talent you can find. Edina Sanovic, I think one of the most interesting actors that I've seen for a long time. And then also the woman I forgot, she's also in The Last Kingdom, just excellent acting. So again, they canceled that because it doesn't get billions of hours of viewing like Squid Game, and I think the artistic quality of this show is just way, way better. Anyway, this is not about movies and my taste. It's just about competitive response. I think Netflix has dropped the ball. That's why the stock is down. Let's talk about Facebook. What is going on with Facebook? Very similar competitive response. Now, I think, and this is why this quote that I used from the poem that I applied to the markets is important. So here's in a nutshell what's going on. Facebook is under pressure. There is competition. TikTok and other things are pushing against Facebook because people are spending more time on those platforms versus Facebook. That's why I think Zuckerberg has done all this Meta stuff. He's basically saying we have to completely redefine the company, do different things, start from scratch, all that stuff, which is great. And I think this is why doing good and bad things is often just a different shade of light in the markets, meaning the market maybe now is obsessed with how bad this is, they're wasting money, they're investing and this and that. But as far as the market is concerned, as far as the actual long-term prospects of the company are concerned, I think this is a very good thing. I'm not buying Facebook. We're not long Facebook. Orange Capital Partners have never been invested in Facebook for various other reasons, actually. They're not necessarily related to this competitive situation right now. But I still think it's laudable that Zuckerberg, as a founder and CEO, is doing this, basically going all in and investing into something very, very new, very different. This is, let's now circle back to Tesla. This is very similar to Tesla with the Tesla bot. I think what Musk was trying to get across in the last earnings call is that the Tesla bot is maybe just a peak of the iceberg, a technological peak of the iceberg, of course, in terms of Tesla becoming more flexible and faster at innovation and faster at building production capacity, because this is what it's all about. And I think this is really what Tesla will be differentiated against others. The speed and flexibility of iteration that they can apply in the manufacturing process, because that's why they're going to be able to bring out newer, better cars faster, better technology, also software. Don't forget the software part of Tesla, of course, key. That's where Tesla is going to have to compete, and they're going to have to compete with companies like Apple and Google sooner or later, because if software becomes the key part of the electric car, and it's not an if, actually, it's a when, then these other companies will have a say, and it's going to be the integration of hardware and software and the ability to flexibly produce at scale, which will make the difference and which will put Tesla on the map as a very, very large market share player in a huge market, which is transportation. So again, the competitive response here by Facebook, I think, is the right one. The punishment in the market is expected, and it's fine. I think as a shareholder of Facebook, I think you should be actually positive right now. It is a bit scary to be under threat from companies like TikTok and stuff, but don't forget, all these companies that are attacking Facebook, in my view, are just those little animals that are biting at the whale's skin. The whale itself is changing course, redefining itself, and this is what's key. So again, I think good and bad in the markets are often just different shades of light, and what is good today could be bad tomorrow, and vice versa. And this is exactly what's going on with Facebook. Now, the last stock I want to discuss is PayPal, and here I think this is a much more serious problem. Now, I personally was never a big fan of PayPal, just because they seem like an old company that is sort of in a new business, and that's really also shown in the last couple of weeks. The stock again down 30% or so. It's still done well over the last 5 years. But what happened to PayPal is also what happened to Square and all these other payment companies. What happened is that they got a lot of new customers through the pandemic bonus, as we call it. The pandemic bonus basically was the handout of money to people, which went straight into things like PayPal accounts, Cash App at Square, and so on and so forth. That's why we had such a big response also. And that's why we're having inflation, because what people did is the velocity of money increased dramatically. Actually, this is something that Cathie Wood spoke about. I think even Jack Dorsey spoke about this. just as a side note, I think I'm a little bit disgusted at Jack Dorsey here, because I was always wondering, why is Twitter, for example, as a company, and Jack Dorsey so adamant that we have to take COVID seriously, and everybody who has any questions about the way we're dealing with COVID was shut down and all that. Shouldn't there be free speech and all these things? And the answer is, to some extent, of course, companies like Square have profited from the measures that were done. I'm not saying actually we shouldn't take COVID seriously. What I'm saying is we should question the measures, such as lockdowns and the handouts of money. And that was kind of silenced because, well, as usual, it was beneficial for in this case Square, which is run by Dorsey. So Dorsey had a vested interest in keeping all these policies alive that we think are misguided and are actually making the situation worse. So what happened to PayPal is they acquired lots and lots of customers like that through the handouts, and those handouts were really terrible if you think about it, because what happened is, and this is in the words of PayPal, is that a lot of these people took the money, put it in their PayPal account, and then just spend it and then never used it again. In other words, it was just a one-time handout spending on online shopping and all that stuff, and then that was it. So it shows you how it's just a waste of money. It was helicopter money, but instead of creating some sort of dynamic in the economy, creating more productive capacity, increasing things like maybe education or whatever, investing in the future, people were just basically doing what economists would have expected anyway, which is they were just using it for consumption, and that's it. End of story. And what happened now with PayPal is, again, PayPal is doing the right thing, actually. PayPal is now, I think, pivoting, as we call it here in Silicon Valley, which is what they said is that we don't want to focus anymore on customer growth, because a lot of the customer growth that we have is that kind of customer growth, these one-off type people that then don't keep spending money. The low-income people, we don't want them. We want people that when they have a PayPal account, they actually do something, they have an economic activity, they have certain needs and services that we can supply them with apps and other services, and make money with them, but in a positive way, in a way that we give them value and they pay us for that, instead of just acquiring all these customers that in the end are just taking handouts from the government. So I think here again, good and bad in the markets are just different shades of light, and what is perceived as bad today could actually be a good long-term solution. I think in the case of PayPal, certainly, again, I would applaud the management for reacting and doing this. It is bad for the company because the growth prospects are different now and the competitive situation is different. And this, by the way, applies to Square as much as PayPal and any other company. There's also, just as a side note here, also the pay now, consume now, pay later market, like Affirm, which I think is a disaster. I mean, these types of companies, in my view, have really no raison d'etre whatsoever. It is actually really bad. We've seen this in Brazil 10 years ago. People shouldn't be given credit for consumption. It's just not a good idea. So having said that, also these stocks are down 50 to 70, 80% from their peaks, and which is good. And I think in that case, in this particular case, consume now and pay later, I don't think there's anything these companies can do to make it better. I just think it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. It shouldn't be happening. And it's also hopefully something that companies like Square and PayPal will realize and then stop doing, or at least do less of it. I mean, some of it is maybe okay, some consumer credit here and there. I'm not against it. But to make a big business out of it, to make it kind of like this is the future of consumption, I think that is bad. So to summarize, we've said many times on this podcast that the theory of competitive response is really what economics is all about. We have three large cap stocks, which is one of them is Facebook, Netflix, and then PayPal. And they've all exhibited certain situations where they either were too slow to respond to competitive situations, or they are actually responding to changes in the marketplace and competitive situations, and they're being punished now. And like I said several times now in this episode, good and bad in the markets are just different shades of light. Sometimes what is perceived as good today can change in the light and become bad, and the other way around. So for example, PayPal's growth was considered good but now it's bad because they're basically saying, look, this growth that we had in volume is not translating into revenue, and therefore it's bad. And the other way around, also something that's perceived as bad today, for example, Facebook basically pivoting, changing the way they're doing business in terms of becoming Meta and all that, is maybe perceived as bad now because lots of investment has to be done, lots of yeah, cash flow and investment, and therefore lower earnings, lower cash flow. Perceived as bad right now, perceived also as maybe a bit scary. Oh, can they do it? Are they going to be able to turn themselves, like Dan Ives from Redbush said, from a basketball player to a skier? All these things, I think those are legitimate questions, and I think time will tell. But what's important is that Facebook is acting, and that I think is laudable, and it just shows that if you have a founder CEO, it is who has control of the company. That is a good thing in the long term. He could be wrong, but at least he's doing something. Now, the final word here about Tesla. So why are we comfortable with Tesla? And actually, I think it's a very nice example today. Tesla is outperforming everybody in the market, even though the market is down a lot because of Facebook. And why is that? Because I think Tesla is doing all the right things. Tesla is first and foremost in the market with physical goods, so it's not as fickle and not as sort of at the whim of there's no TikTok that's going to come and outdo Tesla tomorrow. But more importantly, I think Tesla is doing what I discussed with Netflix. Tesla is putting technology first, engineering and technology first, iteration, error correction. That is the first thing. They're not sort of turning themselves into a car company now, behaving like car companies. They are, and they're very, very adamant about staying a technology company, putting technology first, full self-drive, the robots, all these things, even the solar roof with in the solar business, it's always technology first, and they're not letting themselves be pulled into this conversation, or you're like a car company, and that is very, very important. I think Netflix has done that, and now it's biting back because the competitive advantage is fading away. So Tesla is still a very, very competitive technology company, and the rate of innovation will decide how competitive they will stay. And as far as I can see right now, and we're very happy with that, is that the rate of innovation of Tesla is still orders of magnitude faster than anybody else, and this is what matters the most. Thank you.